do know we're filming Studio Cinema Saturday, right?
No, man, that's tomorrow.
No, that's today.
Oh. What movie are we reviewing?
We're reviewing the...
Stick to your plan. Anticipate, don't improvise. Trust no one. Never yield an advantage. Fight only the battle you're paid to fight. Forbid empathy. Empathy is weakness. Weakness is vulnerability.
Oh, hey, Ham. You here for the movie review?
Hi, and welcome to Studio Cinema Saturday, the show where we review films old and new, the ones that you don't like and the ones that you do. I'm your host, Dalton, and today I'm joined by Kale and Ham. And today we're reviewing David Fincher's latest action thriller, The Killer.
After a fateful near miss, an assassin battles his employers and himself on an international manhunt he insists isn't personal.
The Killer stars Michael Fassbender as the title role, along with Sophie Charlotte, Tilda Swinton, Monique Ganderton, Arliss Howard, Sala Baker, Charles Parnell, and Carrie O'Malley.
And we're going to be starting off the review this week spoiler-free and going over our initial thoughts. So, Dalton, why don't you start us off?
I think it's very possible that amongst this group, I maybe like this film the most. I don't know. I'm just going to go ahead and assert that. Maybe. I don't know if that's true or not.
I liked it a lot, too.
Right.
Not to say I disliked it, but...
Right.
Absolutely. But I think, for me, personally, this is a 10 out of 10 film. Just watched it last night. I mean, I just love the cold, calculated performance. Michael Fassbender does an incredible job. I'm a sucker for narration in film. I think that is always just a very unique, creative tool that you can pull upon. I really like where the story goes, even though it's not anything too complex. I think it just keeps you on the edge of your seat. There's really good choreography. It's shot well. It's edited well. It's everything you think of when you think of David Fincher and his excellence in cinema.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. I really liked the movie too. And, me and Dalton talked about, is this our favorite David Fincher film? And man, I love Seven. I really love Seven. And so it's hard for me maybe to pick between this and Seven. But a lot of David Fincher's other movies maybe feature a more complex plot. This is really a straightforward, a hitman film. I really loved the movie. Looks great, sounds great, feels great. The pacing is good. And man, was my anxiety through the roof while we were watching this film.
I think a little less than them two, but I don't dislike the film at all. I think it was really good. It's nowhere near my favorite of the Fincher movies I have seen. If I were to give it a score, I like my Letterboxd stars, so I'd give it a 3.5 or 4 stars.
Yeah, no, if I had to give it a score, I'm going with like a 9. And it's really hard for me to justify a 9 and not a 10, because it's like, man, I wouldn't change anything about this. I loved it.
And if I'm to address any of what I've seen and just the handful of reviews that I've read, and just based on the IMDb score of 6.8 and the Rotten Tomatoes score, I just think in this type of film you're not going to get maybe as complex of a main character. To address that issue, it's like that's just kind of the whole nature of the film. He really can't talk to people to not, give any clues as to who he is, or they'll pick up on his trail. He's relying mainly on facial expressions and that, the inner monologue, the narration, which I really think, was an interesting window into him.
A lot of the things that I'm seeing where people don't like the movie, and I said as soon as we finished it, like the bad reviews and the people who didn't like this are going to not like it based off of subject material alone. But I'm seeing a lot of times that people don't like this just because of him, the character, he was monotone. And I'm like, man, this guy's a stone cold killer. And he says multiple times throughout the movie, I'm not going to show empathy. He's repressing his emotions and he doesn't want to show anything emotionally. So that's kind of his character here.
And I think maybe the issue that you brought up with he doesn't interact with a lot of people, so maybe you don't get to see a lot of his personal tendencies and such, because he's never interacting really with anybody except in a professional setting. And the people he would interact with in a private, more personal setting, he's doing the things he does in the film because
For them, for their protection.
for them, yes.
Yeah.
The reason some people may have not liked that aspect is it's a lost in translation thing, because this is adapted from a book. In the opening credits, they say it's adapted from
Right.
and they do very well, and you can kind of tell it's adapted from a book, because unlike a lot of movies, this has a lot of inner dialogue, and that is something that you exclusively usually see in novels.
So
In
it's
a
very
book.
prevalent,
Yeah.
But in those moments, he says these things to convince us that he's doing it, solely for the pay, that it's, what does he say exactly? I think he's convincing himself just as much as he's convincing us, but it's like, it's not working all the time. And there's gaps in it, like, not to spoil any of the film or anything, but he does question some of the kills.
So let's go ahead and open it up to spoilers. Do we want to talk about the pace of the film? I really like how the film's told within chapters. We start with chapter 1, Paris, the target, and this is the opening to the film.
The inciting incident.
What I really liked about the opening is that it was slow. When you start a movie slow, you kind of have to commit to the film, to watching the movie, because it
has to be slow with a purpose.
Yeah, you have to, 1, see it going somewhere, and 2, commit to watching it. I love how they build you up like he's this amazing killer and he'd never fail. Then he misses and kills the woman instead of the man, and this is the inciting incident to the movie.
He basically screws up. You can see the panic in his eyes.
Right.
The score
like-
takes over.
Yeah.
It's a very, like you said, it's a slow-paced film, but it's well-paced. But I feel like they ramp up the tension, and it gets fast-paced in moments when it needs to.
Right. Because then you move to the Dominican Republic at the hideout, and that's when the people that he missed the shot for are now gunning for him, and that his boss gunned for him.
And because he stayed an extra day, the hitmen don't get him. They just brutally injure his wife.
And then we move to chapter 3, New Orleans, and you kind of get a little bit of origin to the killer.
Yeah,
You
get a kind of look at his boss and management, per se.
And I loved the pacing of this, because by about this time in the film, you're wondering how this stuff works. You're wondering the operations to what he's doing.
Oh, the scene where he has the nail gun.
Oh, the entire time he has that out, it is like this Chekhov's gun of if a gun's on the table,
It's gonna be
use it type
used,
of
yeah.
thing. Yeah. And when it does, you're just like, you expected it to be, but then it's used, and yet you're still like...
But I love how he still gives him a chance
Yeah,
to survive.
he does.
He puts the phone on the table, but he's just, full of holes now, full of nails.
It's very funny, because everything he does kind of after that first mission where he screws up, where he's talking
It's
about
so
stuff.
methodical.
It's methodical, but the kind of chances he gives people is almost antithetical
To what he
was
says.
said
There's
in the
no such
beginning.
thing as luck. There's
But
no justice.
Maybe there's also an aspect, kind of what I was reading into Fassbender's performance in the role, with him almost being a little psychopathic at the beginning.
Right.
Maybe the chance is false. They're gonna die nonetheless, because that's kinda
And
what
it's
he
an
does
illusion.
with the Dolores character.
Right.
100%. Yeah.
So
Then
That was a very cold kill.
yes,
absolutely.
but it is how she said. She said, "I know you can make it look like an accident," and he does
And
nonetheless.
she falls down the stairs. Yeah.
You have this false sense of security that she's gonna live.
I mean, I was like, when's the other shoe gonna drop the whole time?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah,
But
100%.
there's also like that little bit of hope. And it's right before he does kill her that you're like, oh, are we good? No, never mind.
And then we move on to maybe my favorite chapter of the film, just because of how amazing the fight scene is.
Yes, Florida.
And we're going to Florida for chapter 4.
We're going to see a Florida man.
He fights the steroids man.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
that scene's incredible.
yeah, and Netflix
It's-
did an awesome behind the scenes for that scene specifically. It's 11 minutes and some change long. I recommend if you were into the film, you watch how they shot that. They laid it out on the line. The stuntsmen and the actors laid it out there. That's an awesome, cold fight, an uncomfortable fight.
It's
where-
just so brutal the
Yeah.
whole way through, because it's just like, you know, Fassbender's character, the killer, is just so methodical and almost like plan driven.
right.
Like, he plans things out.
Stick to the plan. Anticipate. Don't improvise. He says so many times in the film.
And
But in this scenario, like opposed to like the very first scene, this is kind of a similar thing. He loses control.
Yeah,
Like
he-
we see what the visual style is in the beginning. Everything's, very smooth. We're kind of floating through a scene. Everything's also kind of static and just framed in these perfect boxes. But when he misses the shot, everything goes shaky cam. It also happens here because he thinks he has the upper hand. He's already drugged the dog. He's snuck into the house. He thinks that he's in the shower. But it turns out that that's a distraction. And then he gets caught off balance. And this dude gets so many hits on him before he's even able to react. He's on the floor and he takes like 2 really hard punches from this 250-pound man.
Right. And then I would essentially say chapter 5 and 6, we have New York, the expert, and Chicago, the client, are essentially him just wrapping the ties of the rest of the film. Visiting.
very much like.
And then you get the
everything-
epilogue.
Yeah.
But he essentially wrapping the ties, the woman at the end.
Let's talk about the expert a little.
Yeah. The expert at the diner. They have that conversation, and then she chances killing him. She takes.
She tries to. 'cause
She takes
knows-
the chance to kill him,
Mm-hmm.
and this is another scenario where they've tried to make you think he's gonna let her live,
But he just
nah.
he just pulls the trigger and he just knows. I think this is a little more of a he just knows the situation.
Yeah,
They're peers essentially
right.
in the same line of business, and she tries to pull like that fast one on him, and he's just like, no, you're going to kill me. So he
But he was gonna kill her anyways. That's the thing.
It's
Either
their
way, she was
killer
gonna die.
codes.
Yeah.
It's their killer
Yeah.
codes. They know, like, if I don't make the decision,
But it's like, very similar scenarios for the two of them. They're, in the very same shoes. And it's like, he could have been put, very well in the same kind of situation because he didn't know what he'd gotten himself into whenever he fails the Paris job.
right. And then we move on to the client.
the man who started this all, the man who originally hired him for that Paris job.
Exactly, and I love that we wrapped around there, and I thought it was a cool little twist that he didn't know he was paying to kill the killer, and then
He was ignorant of what this business was.
I think it's like pivotal to my understanding of the end of the film because he goes, so you really weren't expecting anyone to show up here in the middle of the night? And he's like, no. And then that's whenever he kind of realizes, like, kind of like he was saying at the beginning, I'm one of the few. I don't walk among the many. Here he's kind of seeing that there's like a luxury to not knowing the horrible things that go on behind the scenes. Like everything that he's done throughout the film, this man isn't privy to. Like he
That's so true.
is afforded the luxury of not knowing about these horrendous crimes that are taking place.
Yeah.
And he sees that that's the life that he wants to live ultimately. At the beginning of the film, when he's about to take the initial shot before he misses, he says, I don't give a It turns out that that's not true. He does care about his wife.
He does care about something.
He does care about something.
Yeah.
And I think that all kind of circles back to him in the last chapter on the beach.
the epilogue where, he admits that he's one of the many. To start by being one of the few and to end by being one of the many is, not the route we usually see our hero take throughout a film. This is kind of backwards.
No, yes. In a film, a protagonist character usually starts at the
Started from the
unknowing
bottom.
spot, the
Yeah.
ignorant spot, and then by the end they know the knowledge they have to know. But instead, it's very interesting because you mentioned hero. Like, our character's no hero. It's very interesting that they kind of take that and flip it on his head, almost like, the opposite of a hero's journey,
The reverse, yeah.
since he is no hero. He's a little high on himself.
He is, a little bit. I'm trying to think of what he says exactly. He says, I'm not perfect, but he says he's apart. He is elevated from the many. Or at least that's his perspective at the beginning of the film.
Part of his mindset of I am part of the few and not the many.
But I think it's ironic that really that's the only thing he messes up, is that initial shot at the beginning of the film, because he successfully pulls everything else off.
Besides, like, the fight with the brew.
But he still beat it.
He still beat him. He's successful. It just gets a little nasty, and you think that he goes a little bit more into improvise than anticipate.
But check this out, and this is something that I saw online last night as I was looking around at the film. There's this really specific shot, David Fincher, he's so intentional, where the gun gets slid under the bed by him. And I think almost he put it there intentionally. Because
Kinda
there was
like-
always a piece of the puzzle that we didn't know about going into each kill. Because we never knew his plan, we just saw it enacted. So you really didn't get to know, is he improvising or is he not? But because of the way it worked out, you were assuming everything was going to plan, unless it wasn't, like the beginning. But in that moment, he might have thrown the gun under the bed, because their fight works around the house and it ends back in that room, and that's how he's able to win.
Yeah.
So I think there was a methodology there as well.
Yes.
All right, so now we're going to break down all the elements that comprise a film, the things that you can judge. The cinematography, the music, the acting, the mise-en-scène, all of those great things that come together and make this movie.
Right. We'll take a look at the editing as well and just the overall sound design. And I want to start by talking about the look. This is a Fincher film. It looks amazing. About every movie you go and see today looks amazing because they're shot on such nice cameras. But it's obviously the style of the film that makes it unique. One of the things that me and Dalton were kind of grabbing at while we were watching the film was just the color. They use a nice mix of green and red.
Yellow and beige.
Yellow, beige, a little bit of blue in there. And it just creates a look that can be warm at times and a look that can be cold at times, but they stay with these same colors and sometimes contrast what you're seeing, like when he's going to the Dominican Republic and you're seeing such green all over the screen, trees and fields, and it looks so pretty when he's going to his house, and then it builds up this false sense of security. Then once you get there, his wife is beaten and his house has been broken into. Like, Fincher uses color to kind of put you in these false senses of security, which was so intentional and awesome.
Something I think Fincher always does well is take, like, the real world, and that's every aspect of it.
Yeah.
Especially in early films like Seven and Fight Club. They look very grimy and stuff. He still makes it look pretty.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And that goes for this, too, because this has a side of grime to it. But it also has a side of, like, beauty and stuff to it with the tropical Dominican Republic stuff. Yeah.
Piggybacking off of, like, the realistic aspect of it, one of the concerns that the DP brought up is that there wasn't enough light in the scene where the Florida scene where he's fighting the thug, the beefed up thug. It's just really dark. They shot it with virtually no light. And you can see it as a very dark scene. But that's something I love about it. It's like, this movie needs to live in the trenches. We need super dark, prevalent shadows. Like, it needs to be a dark film because of the subject matter. And all that grime, the green, the yellow, it fits it.
The movie itself is almost about what goes on in the shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in that behind-the-scenes documentary, Fincher and the DP talk about how they use the darkness in that scene and in every other part of the movie to show the audience what they want to show them, and then hide what they don't need to see / don't want to see, and then have, like, in the edges of frames in the Florida scene and stuff, you can barely even see anything on the edges of some of these frames. Mm-hmm. They want you to infer what's there.
What did you think about the score?
I love it. I love Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Trent Reznor is always good. When Trent Reznor, makes a piece of music that he wants you to hear, you hear it. When you want something more subtle, it's subtle.
But you feel it still.
But you let the sound design take over at times, which, by the way, the film has incredible sound design, especially in these fight scenes. The dark electronic beats are definitely the vibe for this movie.
Yeah.
That's their
The music. they use the music to keep you on the thrill ride, you know. When he pulls out the cheese grater.
The cheese grater, and
Pulls,
it sounds like a knife.
It sounds like a knife unsheathing, and it's a cheese grater, and he ends up throwing it. That was brilliant.
And that's something that they pretty much made up on set, because everything, the whole kitchen was set dressed. And he was like, Michael Fassbender said, I should be doing something here. I'm not just going to sit and wait to get shot. And they're like, okay, look in the drawer. And on the first take that they did, he pulls out the cheese grater. And then they're like, all right, pull everything else out of the drawer. It's the cheese grater now. And then they fool you with the knife sound.
Yeah.
To move on to the editing of the film, which accompanies the music and soundtrack so well, I like how they switch back and forth between quick cutting and long takes. Mm-hmm. And it just brings this sense of adrenaline to you almost. Like, when they want you to see him doing something, they're kind of quick cutting. But when they want you to wait and see what happens, and they want you to be on the edge of your seat to see what happens, they'll slow it down and you'll kind of watch.
And that's something the editor talked about in a behind-the-scenes featurette, going back to, how you said we're cutting between these long takes and these very quick cuts. It's like Fincher is great about getting coverage, and he gives his editor a lot of options in the edit room. And he's like, a way that I build tension is probably start the scene kind of wide, and then as things ramp up, we're going to get tighter. And in one of those breaks, we're like, the fight resets, or like someone's getting hit into the TV or the coffee table. When we're taking a breather, whenever the brute gets stabbed, we're going to work our way in as things get dramatic. We're going to work our way out as things ramp down a bit. And that's how visual tension's created, which is just really interesting.
And overall, all of these things speak to how well made the film is.
Oh, yeah.
And,
ultimately,
we talked about earlier, before we filmed the review, how this film made no money at the box office. It made $400,000, one of you said.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things where I think movies that are just streaming and going straight to streaming and living on streaming services are going to kind of struggle at the box office. And it's a poor representation of the film to just look at the box office numbers here. This is just a guy that knows film, knows how to make it look amazing. Seven, Gone Girl, Fight Club. Those are, some of my favorite movies, and, I'm really bad.
Social Network.
I haven't seen some of his other films like The Social Network, but, David Fincher is one of my favorite filmmakers, and I've only seen a moderate sample size of his work, and The Killer is right on top of that list with the other films. So for our last section of the review, we're going to go over some final thoughts and rate the movie. If I had to give this any final thoughts, it would just be that, I encourage people who like the thriller genre to give this a watch. For my final score for the film, I'm going to give it a 9.5, because it's nearly impossible to be a perfect movie, but there's nothing I would change here. I thought this movie was as close to it as you can get,
Ultimately, it's it is hard for a film to get a 10 out of 10. Maybe I'll reevaluate to a 9.5. Because I did say earlier that I think the only implausibility was that during the brute scene, just the feasibility of these two characters going at it and having this much endurance, and maybe it just being a little unrealistic at times.
I don't know. I don't discredit the film there. Those are two trained killers. Those are. The brute, he's jacked up on so much that he could have probably fought for 3 more days, maybe.
Fincher fans, definitely go check out the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you just like action movies or hitman movies, the subject matter, just a very captivating film. But 9.5 out of 10. Definitely go give it a watch.
I said in the spoiler-free section, 3.5 to 4 stars. I'm going to stand by that. My only, complaint per se would be maybe the way Michael Fassbender plays it a little too psychopathic. But also, I feel like you could fall into that under his job. And maybe, as I said earlier, there was a little bit lost in translation with personality due to it being an adaptation and only having so much inner dialogue you can take from a book that applies to the plot of the movie. Because he doesn't get a lot of those personal interactions, and the ones that are in an intense situation. So you don't really get a moment to slow down and see him in a very personal sense. So, I'm going to go with 3.5 to 4 stars.
And that's what I attribute my kind of high score to, is like, I think it checks all my boxes. The inner dialogue, the narration, the fact that it's a thriller, this cold, calculating protagonist, and just a, absolute thrill ride, twists and turns, beautifully shot, well edited. It checks all the boxes.
We're glad that you watched Studio Cinema Saturday, Episode 3, The Killer, and we hope that you'll come back for the next movie. And, go ahead and go check out some of the other content if you're interested. We make short films here on YouTube, and you can check out the behind the scenes, the trailers. It's all there for you, so we'll see you there.
Plenty of more content on the way. Stay tuned.